Next April, the Works will be mounting an exhibition of world textiles in the gallery. They are from my private collection of textiles from all over the world. My name is Cynthia Cort, and I also happen to be the collections manager here at the Works, which means that I look after the local, historical, and industrial collections. I spent my young adulthood as a scholar of Indian textiles and lived in India for almost 5 years in the 1970s and 1980s. I did research on brocade weaving in Benares, Varanasi, Patola double Ikat weaving in Western India, Gujarat state, and regional embroidery styles also in Gujarat. I shot a 16mm film about Patola saris and the complicated processes by which they are produced. The receipt of a Fulbright grant allowed me to collect a number of these hand-produced fabrics, some of which will be in next spring's exhibition. After my years in India, I have continued to collect beautiful handmade items from other parts of the world. Most of the materials are natural, silk, wool, and cotton, and bast fibers such as linen and hemp, as opposed to petroleum-based fibers such as polyester, acrylic, or nylon. People often decorate their fabrics with precious objects such as gold and silver, glass beads, and shells. Techniques involved in the making of textiles in this exhibition include weaving, stitching and embroidery, dyeing, and printing. Some of these fabrics have great visual impact when seen from a distance. Others are a tour de force of detail and complicated structure. They reward both a broad viewing of the pieces as a whole and close attention to their details. It is an exciting prospect that they can be exhibited in the Works Gallery. In weaving, the warp or lengthwise threads are stretched on a loom under tension. This allows the weaver to interlace the weft or crosswise threads without tangling them. There are many ways in which these two sets of elements can be manipulated to achieve different effects and textures, including twill weave, satin, brocade, tapestry, and pile, but the basic plain weave grid of crossing weft over and under warp is the simplest. Many of the textiles on display here were made using handmade tools, which were designed and made by the worker to fit exactly a specific technical need. A loom commonly used in India is built over a pit in the floor. This allows the weaver to sit on the edge of the hole and work the loom pedals in the pit, but does not require that the building have high walls to accommodate a loom. Warps are stretched out in the straight streets of weaving neighborhoods and transported from dyer to weaver on bicycles. A notable fact about this sari is that although it is woven in plain weave, it has an iridescent shimmering quality to it, which changes according to the direction of the light, and which is achieved by using a warp and weft of different colors. This is sometimes called shot woven. The warp is white and the weft is yellow. Sometimes the effect is created by weaving two threads with more obvious different colors, such as purple and orange, as in this cotton sari. This very complicated woven dress from Bhutan is brocaded on the loom with multicolored silk threads on a cotton ground. Brocades involved using an extra weft thread over the basic warp and weft of the cloth to float along the surface and create the pattern. This elegant fabric from Laos is another example of brocade weaving. The motifs include snakes and birds. In addition to the red warp and weft threads which form the basic grid, there are supplementary colored weft threads which form the pattern floating in front of and behind the ground threads. These untwisted silk floss threads are shinier than the ground threads because they are not twisted as tightly. Twisting adds strength to a thread. Because these untwisted threads float over the structure of the fabric, they do not need to be as strong as the ground. The little bird motifs on this fabric are about 3/4 of an inch long. The whole piece is 9 inches wide. The detail is remarkable. Embroidery involves embellishing an existing fabric with an extra thread or fabric which is not part of the structure. The smooth silk embroideries of China glow with brilliant colors and shiny surfaces. This embroidery was used on traditional robes, tourist items, and materials for export. was also used on textiles as varied as saris for the Parsi community in Western India and the square Spanish shawls sold in Europe at the beginning of the 20th century. The embroidery of fez in Morocco is very dense and almost identical on both sides. This silk-on-cotton work is used for household furnishings such as pillow covers, tablecloths, bedding, and towel ends. The stitch used is similar to cross-stitch, but because it is reversible, which cross-stitch is not, it is actually a version of backstitch. Block printing is a process in which a wooden block is carved and used to print a repetitive design on a fabric. It is used all over the world, but is especially common in Western India. Here are some pictures of me learning how to use the blocks to print as accurately as possible. Many blocks are carved by hand in the town of Petapur in Western India. Perhaps the first resist method discovered was tie-dye. When one ties a fabric or a thread and dyes it, the dye will not penetrate the knot. Often when we think of tie-dye in the United States, we imagine the Grateful Dead model of large areas tied and dyed in multiple colors. However, in many parts of the world, tie-dye is done on a much smaller scale and with more subtlety. Resist on the fabric, shown here, has been achieved by sewing a pattern with a thread and pulling the stitches very tightly before dyeing. The original ground of the African piece is composed of very narrow strips of hand-spun and hand-woven cotton, sold in rolls. The rolls are sewn together into a larger fabric and then stitched and dyed. Each circle is about an inch across. A second resist method consists of painting or printing a resist medium, such as wax or mud, onto a fabric prior to dyeing it. This is the method used to produce the distinctive batiks of Indonesia. The fabric illustrated here has had wax drawn onto it with a pen called a chanting. The chanting consists of a bamboo holder and a small copper cup with a tube through which the hot wax flows. It is difficult to control the rate of flow of the wax, as the artist must keep the wax at the correct temperature to flow onto the fabric. She works with a pot of melted wax which sits on a fire next to her. Batiks are often produced by printing the wax with a copper or wooden block print onto the fabric. This is an easier and much faster method than the painstaking drawing of complicated designs. Sometimes a combination of both methods is used. Batik is common in Java, in Indonesia, but it is also practiced in other parts of the world, including India, Sri Lanka, and Africa. Ikat is a resist process in which, instead of tying and dyeing a finished fabric, one dyes the threads before they are woven into a fabric. This can be done in either the warp or weft direction, or both. The motifs that are achieved are often very detailed, but have the characteristic of having slightly fuzzy outlines in the direction in which the dyed threads are used, warp or weft. This picture is of a man's garment from the island of Sumba in Indonesia. Earlier fabrics from this island are often decorated with confronting pairs of roosters, snakes, or other motifs. The lion figures in this textile derive from the history of Indonesia as a colony of the Netherlands. Facing lions were common on Dutch coins and therefore are an imported motif. The patterning is achieved in warp ikat, yielding the fuzzy outline on the top and bottom of each motif. The word ikat is Malaysian. In many languages, other terms, including simply tie-dye, are used. In the West, however, ikat has become the word of choice to describe this process. As I said earlier, the warp and/or the weft are dyed before weaving. This is a section of the warp of a double ikat partially tied and dyed before being put on the loom. This is a piece of the film I shot of patola weavers in 1979. The loom is very simple, but because of the control of the measuring and dyeing, the motifs are intricate and exact. Please look closely at this Ikat dyed fabric. It is a fragment of a patolu sari. It has both warp and weft tie-dyed threads, which yield unevenly lined up threads in both directions. Notice the jagged lines going both up and down and sideways at the edges of each square. This is the most carefully aligned Ikat in the world, and it is done on a scale 3 saris long, about 20 yards, by 50 inches wide, increments of 1/4 of an inch. An amazing feat. You have seen here just a fraction of the total group of items that will be shown in the spring of 2021. We hope that this presentation will whet your appetite to come to the exhibition scheduled for next spring. I'd like to introduce you to some beautiful and interesting world textiles, woven, embroidered, and printed or resist dyed. Please mark your calendar and join us in enjoying this exhibition. Thank you.